All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Natural Health Practices. Thanks for joining us here in the office, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, thanks for joining in. I'm Megan. I'm an associate nutrition practitioner here, as well as the PEMF practitioner. I know everyone that's here already knows me, but for those of you on Facebook, that way you kind of know who's up here and who's talking. I do want to let you know that we have a handout today. I'm going to try to post it online after the workshop as well, but for anyone that's here in the office, you can kind of follow along here, and if you want to make some notes, I tried to make sure some of the more complicated concepts were kind of written down so you could be listening instead of like frantically writing if you decide to take notes, but no pressure. So you do have that as a little resource, okay? So I think that a lot of people will hopefully watch this workshop because the topic is about acid reflux, and that's something that is incredibly common amongst people. Like, everyone has either had it or knows someone that has it, either severely or intermittently. It's something that we don't even really talk about, right? It's just so common. Everyone can just go to the drugstore and pick up some Tums or some Prilosec or over the counter or get a prescription. It's just something that's happening. It's become very commonplace. But before we dive into the talk about acid reflux, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and kind of define what acid reflux is, okay? So just to clarify, acid reflux is a condition in which the hydrochloric acid from the stomach escapes up to the esophagus through the lower esophageal sphincter, which is a ring-shaped muscle. It kind of opens and closes and allows food to pass from the esophagus to the stomach. So in acid reflux, it's the opposite, right? Things are coming up from the stomach, the acid's coming up, it causes discomfort, okay? So typical symptoms of acid reflux include, acid coming up, burning in the esophagus, sometimes belching, chronic throat clearing or sore throat. Sometimes people are coughing, have difficulty swallowing, nausea, even asthma has been associated with acid reflux, and sometimes hiccups and even wheezing. In little kids and infants, which now there's been a huge rise of seeing acid reflux, like we have babies and infants that are on prescriptions. I think it's like 24% of infants get prescribed something for their acid reflux, which is really high considering it's like a newborn baby. In children and infants, it can manifest itself as ear infections, excessive crying, nausea, vomiting, excessive coughing, respiratory problems, refusing food, excessive belching, and burping. Okay, so it's like pretty typical symptoms, but a couple of those in there can be confusing, right? Like little kids that cry a lot, or we have people that sometimes are just like burping a lot. They don't always recognize that maybe that's what the issue is, okay? So I just wanted to make sure we're all kind of on the same page before we move forward with the rest of the workshop. So how many of you guys here have ever had acid reflux or heartburn, even if it was just a one-time thing? Oh, only one person in the back, maybe a little bit. Okay, so I'm doing this talk because it's something that I'm very familiar with. I have truly experienced acid reflux at its best, and it can be very frustrating, but it's one of those things that I thought was so common and that everyone was dealing with, okay? So if you've been to any of my talks or have spent time with me, you know that I have a pretty complicated medical history, right? I've had some really, really serious things happen, throughout my life with my health. One of those things has been chronic digestive issues. And with that came pretty severe acid reflux. So as a little kid, my parents were always giving me Tums or little kid alternatives to that. The doctors were always saying oh, she's fine, just give her that. By the time I was 11, I was on prescription acid blocking drugs. So I was taking nexium, which is like the purple pill. It's pretty famous. Like a lot of people have taken it, which it literally you take and it stops the acid production within the stomach. So we were thrilled when they prescribed that, right? I thought that's great. No more acid reflux, no problem. Let's get it out of there. So it was something that I had to take every single day. And if I didn't take it, I would have acid reflux. I remember so vividly, you guys, being in middle school and every day after lunch, having to walk to the nurse's office to get my nexium. And it was so normal. It just felt very normal. Everyone in my family was taking it. What's the big deal? Okay. So one thing I will note is even with taking nexium, though, yes, it helped with the acid reflux symptoms, but it didn't really solve any of my other GI issues. I was still chronically constipated. I was still having nausea and constantly complaining about my stomach, but we were happy that at least that sensation of burning was gone, okay? So that's really good. So with that in mind, with the idea that here I was like 11 years old on this prescription medication, I do just want to like briefly talk about the market for antacids and acid blocking drugs. So the research that I found was from 2015, and in 2015, just that year, acid reducing or acid blocking drugs made $8 billion, and 44% of US citizens had taken an acid blocking or reducing drug at least once, if not multiple times in that year. 44%. That is crazy, right? And additionally, 1 out of every 5 people experiences heartburn or acid reflux at least once per week or more frequently. So those are some like pretty serious numbers, right? I think it's one of those issues that it's like, it's not life-threatening, so we don't really talk about it. It's like it happens. People just keep their prescription drugs or their Tums or whatever in their purse and just use it as they need to go. And we don't realize that like this is a warning sign. Something is wrong and out of place, and that's not how our bodies were designed to feel. And that symptom, having that acid up here and like burning and being uncomfortable, is not normal. So that's like the first thing I want to emphasize is like acid reflux is not normal and should not be this commonplace, okay? So luckily for me, I eventually went off of my antacids and the nexium and everything when I started my nutrition response testing program way back in 2006, okay? And I learned something from my practitioner that blew my mind, and I literally think about it so often. So here's what I learned. I learned that acid reflux is a sign of poor digestion. All right, that makes sense. It also can be a sign of malnutrition. And the big one is I learned that our stomach needs acid, okay? I was like so perplexed by this. Granted, I was 16 years old, but I had been on my nexium at that point for 5 years. And I was like, wait a minute, why would I want acid in my stomach? It's so uncomfortable and it comes up and it burns. And why would I want it in there? So I was very confused. It took a little bit of time, but my practitioner really worked with me to kind of paint like a clear picture of what's happening in the body and why the stomach actually needs acid, okay? So the stomach was in fact designed to have acid in it. It's literally like a little pouch in the body that holds acid or hydrochloric acid, okay? The cells that line our stomach lining are very special. They're not anywhere else in the body. They're very specific to the stomach because it's designed to hold this very, very, very acidic solution, okay? And the reason for this has to do with the process of digestion. So just really quickly, I'm gonna run through this. I know that digestion as a whole is super complicated, but in terms of acid production, I just wanna touch on like these couple points. So bear with me. If anyone gets confused, you just let me know. So obviously with digestion, we eat food, it goes into our mouth, we chew it, it goes down our esophagus and into our stomach, okay? What's that? Yep, and she already knows. First stage of digestion is in the mouth. So actually, first stage is even outside the mouth when you're thinking about food because that changes the digestion. But the big one is when you put it in the mouth, there are enzymes in our saliva that help contribute. So then it goes down the esophagus into that stomach, okay? And in the stomach, in let's say a healthy stomach, there's acid. The food goes in there and the acid actually helps break down the food. It starts to break it down into smaller molecules, into like, amino acids and things like that. And it kind of starts turning it into like a paste. I like to say that it's almost like the consistency of like a smoothie, right? It's like the acid's in there, like breaking down the food, making sure it gets turned into like this cool stomach smoothie thing going on, okay? So it should be able to do that pretty quickly with how much acid is in there. Then from there, it goes through the pyloric sphincter into the small intestines. So this is where I really want you to pay attention, and where I think it gets so interesting is that the acidity of this cool stomach smoothie is what actually triggers that pyloric sphincter to open and close. So if you do not have enough acid in your stomach, what happens is the signaling does not like reveal itself to the sphincter that opens and closes. So the food just gets stuck in the stomach. It cannot move into the small intestine like it's supposed to, right? Because literally the like chemical signaling of acid is what triggers that process to happen. So if we have too low of stomach acid, it sits in the stomach, it starts to rot, it putrefies, it starts to ferment. And what happens with fermentation? It bubbles and releases gas. If you've ever fermented or made beer or kombucha or anything like that, you know that this like bubbling occurs. So here it is, it's stuck in your stomach, this food, and it's starting to bubble up. And with the bubbles comes some of the stomach acid that is hanging out in the stomach, hangs out in the stomach. So it comes up the esophagus, and that's where you get like the actual burning sensation. It's really uncomfortable. And our bodies were designed for things to go down the esophagus and through the digestive tract. It was not designed for it to be coming back up. So there's no protective mechanism within the esophagus, right? So that's why it's so uncomfortable and so frustrating when people have acid reflux. And that's also why doctors tend to jump and like give them something to reduce that acid, because they're worried about the health and integrity of the esophagus. So with the spectrum, it's like we don't want that happening because we don't want to cause damage to the esophagus, but at the same time, taking acid reducing medications isn't helping anything. It's just kind of contributing to this vicious cycle of not having enough acid in there, okay? So that means that stomach acid is extremely important to good digestion in the body as a whole. And under normal circumstances, the stomach acid not only breaks down food into small and more usable components, but it also kills viruses and pathogenic bacteria, even parasites. Okay, so if something's on our food, and let's say there's some bacteria, it goes into our stomach, the acid is so strong in our stomach, it should be able to kill that, okay? So it's like a protective thing as well, so that things shouldn't be able to get through. Or even like with yeast, a lot of people come in and they're like, oh, I have candida, or I have yeast issues or yeast infections. What should be happening is if there's a little bit of yeast on something, it should go into the stomach and it should be destroyed by the stomach acid. If there's not enough stomach acid in there, what happens is that gets through. It ends up getting into the rest of the digestive tract, or it ends up taking over parts of the stomach, and that's definitely not how it was designed to work. Another issue that can happen is sometimes with people, let's say there's not enough stomach acid and it sits and rots, okay? There is another scenario where sometimes what happens is there's not enough stomach acid and the body freaks out and just opens up that sphincter and pushes the food through, even though it's still in really large molecules, okay? It's too big. It shouldn't have been pushed through. It did not get turned into our cool stomach smoothie thing going on. So it gets pushed into the small intestines, and that's where you start getting food allergies, leaky gut, because these big particles are getting into the body. The small intestine doesn't know how to handle particles like that. It doesn't know what to do. So these large molecules get stuck like against the small intestine, and they start to rot in that part, and they actually can like wear away at the intestinal lining, and that's when food particles start getting into the bloodstream. We have immune responses. People will have like autoimmune issues, and that's why, like when it boils down to it, food and digestion is so essential. So you'll see like on your handout that literally like this kind of scenario can cause anything from GI upset to rheumatoid arthritis to people with mental health issues, because we're literally like malnourished and we're not getting the right nourishment to the body, to the brain. There's nothing to create more neurotransmitters, or there's too much inflammation because the body's constantly fighting these big molecules that got into the body where they shouldn't have been. All right, so it's a pretty like important thing. Let's see, I think I talked about some of these. Oh, I know, one thing that I didn't tell you that I really want you to know is when I was talking about how some pathogens get through, like they'll get through the stomach, or they start to really multiply because there's not enough acid to kill them off. So one of those, yeast being a big one, is think about the fermentation process. We need yeast. Like if you're making beer or something, or sourdough bread, you know you need a little bit of yeast. So in the stomach, if things aren't getting pushed through normally and it starts to ferment, there's bound to be a little bit of yeast. It's pretty normal. But what happens is it gets out of balance in that stomach. And the crazy thing that yeast can do is the yeast can actually attach itself to the sphincters up here by the esophagus and down here to the small intestine. when it starts to take over those sphincter muscles, it actually paralyzes them. So those muscles stay open. So people who have chronic acid reflux, that every time they eat, they feel something, tends to be there's some kind of overgrowth, and typically yeast has paralyzed that muscle from being able to open and close. So that acid is continuously being able to come up. Same thing with like food allergies. It could be that something like a pathogen like yeast that's able to do this attached to that that sphincter here to the small intestine and actually paralyzed it. So molecules are just running through. You're eating something and it's running right out of you, which is something that we hear people say, like, oh, I ate something, and then you see it come out in your bowel movement. Something's not right. There's something going on in the digestive process that's not happening as it should. Things are running through the body, and that can be really dangerous and kind of, cause havoc within the body. All right, so we know that treating acid reflux with acid blocking or antacid medication only masks and can kind of speed up issues, okay? On top of that, the acid blocking drugs have been linked to certain types of cancer and brain disorders like Alzheimer's and dementia, and even mood disorders. So just like I kind of talked about, like it basically causes malnourishment. The body can't get any nourishment from what it's eating because we don't have the acid to break it down, and all sorts of things can happen from there. So what can we do about it? There are a lot of options and things that we can do to help with acid reflux naturally. So based on what you know that we just talked about, it is really, really important to make healthy food choices and to choose nutrient-dense foods so that when we are putting food into the body, that when it gets broken down, that there is good nutrients. So processed foods are out if you're dealing with this or know someone that's dealing with this. You also want to try to include naturally fermented foods. Things like sauerkraut, apple cider vinegar, kimchi, yogurt, kefir, even a little bit of kombucha, although that one I would say in moderation. Those things are rich in good probiotics and enzymes. So when you're basically adding that into the stomach, you're kind of helping the process of digestion along. Especially the apple cider vinegar can be a good one. Just do like a little bit in some water. You can take it as a shot. Some people like to sip on it. Not me. I want it down there because it can be a little intense to drink, right? But what happens when you do that is you're kind of providing extra acid for the stomach to help it do its job so that things get broken down and you can utilize them. So that's a big one. Those fermented foods can be really great. Also, reducing sugar and grains from the diet is very helpful. There are also supplements that have small amounts of the hydrochloric acid actually in them, which can help keep the pH in balance, okay? And that's something that is pretty important that people don't realize, is like making sure they have good digestive enzymes, which we'll talk about a little bit later on when we talk about the nutrition response testing. But some of you are already on some of those. If you're on a program here, if you've ever been on Multizyme or Zypan or betaine hydrochloride, those literally help with the acid in the stomach. So it's a really essential part of healing. There are sometimes those things are really helpful. Sometimes there are other burdens happening in the body that need to be addressed, okay? So just like we do with nutrition response testing, making sure that there is nothing else going on, like if there's bacteria or if you're, having a food allergy or something that's also causing irritation, we want to make sure that we're addressing those. It's also important to make sure you're drinking a good amount of water, staying hydrated. Dehydration can cause to low stomach acid. Same with salt. Not having any salt in your diet, especially a high quality salt, can also be difficult to produce stomach acid because the actual chemistry of when you have a little bit of salt in the stomach helps with that acid production. And on the handout I wrote our favorite brand that's really nutrient dense. You only need a little bit. It can be really, really helpful. And then the big one that people always forget about is chewing your food. So chewing your food, having the enzymes and everything in your saliva, and when you're chewing, you're breaking it down, right, into smaller molecules. So you're doing a little bit of the work for the stomach already. So then when that food gets to the stomach doesn't have to work so hard, which if you're in some kind of, state where you're struggling with certain symptoms or something, you want the GI tract to work as little as possible. So that's what you're kind of doing when you're taking your time and chewing your food. It's not just something that your grandma told you so that you wouldn't choke. It actually has something to do with the whole process, okay? I do want to do a little like side note here that there are some cases, very rare, that a person can either have a hiatal hernia, which is when the stomach actually gets pinched up here in between muscles, and that can cause acid reflux. So sometimes like if you ever come in and like it's a chronic issue, we'll feel and see if that's something that's happening. And the other thing is every once in a while, like 1% of the time, someone can actually have too much stomach acid, but it's very rare. And the way that that happened is almost always because there was too low stomach acid, and then a bacteria called H. pylori, which maybe you've heard of before, crept into that stomach. And what it does is the stomach freaks out and is like, oh my gosh, the H. pylori is here, we gotta kill it. And your stomach just starts going crazy, like using everything it's got, producing acid, so much acid, H. pylori doesn't care. It's not gonna get killed off at that point. It's been in there, it's multiplied, it can kind of protect itself, and your stomach panics and just is continuously trying to produce a lot of stomach acid. So very rarely in that scenario, you do actually have too much acid in your stomach, but it's because there was a time when you had too low stomach acid. But the same thing goes for that scenario. We would follow a very similar protocol in the probiotic-rich foods and making sure we're eating the right things, but we might choose a little bit different in terms of supplementation. We'd have to soothe the stomach first and help kill that H. pylori before we could move forward with like balancing out the actual acid within the stomach, okay? So that's just something to be aware of, because every once in a while someone comes in and that's what's going on. So I don't want you thinking that that's never the case, that people have too much acid, but it's very rarely the case. So regardless of the cause, we know that treatment of acid reflux has to go beyond the symptom control that we've got going on in mainstream, right? The fact that so many people utilize acid inhibiting drugs or acid reducing drugs is insane. And we, obviously know that we need to change our focus here. We need to focus more on nutrient-dense food, easy to digest foods, and making sure that we're actually correcting the problem and adding nourishment to the body. We also have to remove possible blocks to healing, which is where nutrition response testing can come in, okay? So I know most of you who are here in the office are familiar with nutrition response testing, but if you're watching on Facebook and are not sure what it is, I'm just going to kind of give you a quick rundown. That nutrition response testing is a system we use to zero in on underlying causes of illness or unwanted symptoms. And with this system, we can determine what the body needs nutritionally to heal and repair it. Okay, so the body has many layers, and with nutrition response testing, we can literally go in and see what issues are going on and how we can help heal it. So maybe this will be for you in conjunction with a supplement that has hydrochloric acid, or maybe it will be in conjunction with us recommending that you eliminate sugar or some kind of food that is causing irritation to your body and throwing things out of whack. That's definitely a possibility, but that's why you can come in and actually get tested, and we can design a protocol very specific to you and making sure that we're providing you with nutrients to regain the vitality of the organs and to help fix the problems like from their source. We're not just covering up symptoms, okay? It sounds pretty cool, right? It definitely is, and that's what helped me. That's literally how I got off of my nexium, okay? By the time I was 16, it took a couple of weeks, but I was almost completely off of it by the time I introduced a couple of different supplements. And for me, my stomach acid was too low. I was put on like a crazy amount of Zypan because I needed the acid to help with the digestive process, okay? So, it's probably easier if I show you. So I will probably, if Kim or someone wants to sneak up here for a minute, so I can kind of show you, give you a visualization of nutrition response testing. She's coming. You guys are pros. You could probably come up here.
It's true.
Yeah. All right. We got Kim up here. So I just kind of want to show you, like, obviously, Kim is alive, and she's human, right? She's standing here. It's awesome. And just like while she's standing here, we know that because she's a human, she has strength and energy within her body, okay? But let's say that we decided today that Kim and I are going to go up north to Ohio, where I'm from. They just got a ton of snow, and I'm going to take her ice fishing, right? We're going to go out ice fishing. Kim accidentally falls into the water and she comes out and she's hypothermic. What happens in that scenario is that all of her strength and energy is going to start leaving her toes and her fingers and her legs and her arms, and it's going to go towards the essential organs. All of that energy and that strength in her body and blood flow, right, it's going to go towards the heart and the lungs, everything essential that's in here, and up towards her brain. Okay, it's really important. Does that make sense? We kind of get that concept, right? We understand that that's what would happen in this scenario. So right now, just while she's standing here, she's not under any stress, okay? She's standing there, and if she puts out her arm, and I decide to match the pressure on her arm, she can match this pressure, okay? She's not under any stress. It's very easy for her to do this, and I'm not pushing really hard. We're just kind of matching each other's pressure here, all right? So that's really good. So what happens if I stomp on Kim's foot while I'm pushing down on her arm? Does anybody know? Her arm's gonna go down, okay? Because what's happened is I've caused stress somewhere else in the body, and the body is saying, no way, like I do not need to keep this arm up. I have to deal with something else going on here. The same is true for all of the organs in the body, okay? If they're under stress, or something is going on and there's irritation there and we touch that organ, the arm can no longer hold itself up because the body is saying, no, there's more important things going on here. So that's kind of how we utilize nutrition response testing to determine what's going on in the body for you and, narrowing in, and that's why it's very specific, based person to person. All right, so let's say that Kim's stomach is under stress and that she's been having acid reflux, okay? And let's say she holds out her arm, and I know that she's been having acid reflux, and I touch near her stomach or maybe where she's been having pain in her esophagus, and we know that it's under stress, and I try to match her pressure, her arm is gonna go down, okay? So that's a signal to me that something is going on. There is stress in that organ, all right? What I can do is, which of course I didn't grab them, but with nutrition response testing, we have kits, so the 5 stressor kits, and so we can actually determine what is it that's stressing this out, what is causing, this acid reflux, what's going on. So we have a kit that has food, immune challenges, heavy metals, chemicals, and then one that represents scars within the body. So I can actually take the different vials from those kits and place them on Kim's body to determine what is it that's stressing out that area that we just determined is not happy. All right, so let's say for this instance that we figure out that there's some bacteria with Kim. There's something going on, there's bacteria that shows up in the stomach, okay? So then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab our whole food supplements that we use in this office, and I'm gonna pick ones that I know are helpful for bacteria or helpful for supporting that organ, and we hold them up onto the body to determine which one helps strengthen that organ, okay? So let's say, for example, that Kim has some bacteria going on. Maybe that's contributing, and that's part of the problem of what's happening with her acid reflux. I would have her hold out her arm, and then for this example, I'm gonna just use Zypan, because this is a really good one and pretty common for digestive issues. It would be on her body, and I would be touching that spot, and I'd push, and she can hold her arm up. It's no longer under stress, but if I take that away and I push here, her arm goes down. So that's how we kind of utilize this system and get signals from the body to know what's going on, what nutrients does her body need. And that's why it's really important to come in and get tested, because everyone can be a little bit different. Maybe Zypan really works for her. Maybe for someone else that's too much hydrochloric acid. Maybe it has to, happen a little bit differently. Maybe we need to heal the digestive tract before we add in, something that has a hydrochloric acid. So that's why it's very specific to each person, okay? Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Awesome, thank you, Kim. All right, so we use this Design Clinical Nutrition to address very specific issues like we just said, and it really does depend on each person. It can change based on each person and how we address each issue. Please keep in mind, if you're watching on Facebook, that I know that this looks crazy, okay? I know that it looks really unusual to see me pushing on her arm and thinking that I can get information from this, but I promise you that I can, and that thousands and thousands, if not millions of people have actually gone through programs utilizing this specific type of muscle testing and have had great success with it, and that's including me. My life has been completely changed by nutrition response testing. If you want to know more about my story, I'd be happy to share that with you, but like, I cannot say enough about it, and that's why I'm here, and that's why everyone in this office works here, is because we've seen serious changes with ourselves and with other people by using this system, getting to the root cause of what's going on when maybe we've been struggling with something for so long, for so many years. All right, another cool thing about nutrition response testing is that it's safe for any age, okay? Babies to 100 years old and beyond, we can do it. We can absolutely use this method of testing for them. If you're interested in nutrition response testing or nutrition coaching or any other services that we offer here, like chiropractic or PEMF therapy, feel free to stay after and talk with us, or if you're online, you can message us on Facebook, or you can call the office, and we'll do our best to give you a call tomorrow and make sure that we get you scheduled for anything that you're interested in. All right, we also do virtual nutrition coaching if you're having an issue, and we can walk you through different steps to make sure that we're helping you move forward and make good food choices, but also help addressing kind of issues that are happening. All right, if you have any questions about acid reflux or about anything that we talked about today, feel free to ask, or if you're online, you can write on our Facebook or again message us, and we'll do our best to respond as quickly as we can. We'll definitely make sure that we post the resource that we handed out today as well. Does anyone here have questions right now before we turn Facebook off? We're good? All right, we'll see you later, Facebook.